Interesting.
Happy Friday. Got some snow, about a couple inches here with blowing, drifting snow in central Illinois. Had to get up this morning and shovel the driveway, get the sidewalk cleared off. So still kind of dealing with the snow shoveling hair. I'll just pop my headphone out. Look at that. All right, welcome in, Bishop on Air on this Friday. How you guys doing out there? Good morning to those checking into the live chat. And let me know how you guys handled the snow. Love to kind of get an indication as to where you're at in the state and just about how much snow you got. Again, we got a couple inches here in the greater Springfield area. If not more, I imagine, the blowing and drifting snow on the highways and the side roads likely going to cause some problems. So just, obviously, if you're going to head out this morning, be careful. Plowing through Des Plaines. Good morning. Kenny, Richard, Dave, I'm your Huckleberry, Sergio, the Ghost, Brett, Tenebris, hola. All right, only an inch or two in Darien and DuPage. Tuscola, about 3 inches, Steve says. What else we got? Half an inch in southern Illinois. All right, so is that like a blanket? All right, hey, we got some stuff to tackle this morning. Of course, the latest in the gun ban and litigation against the state's gun and magazine ban. You've got the state having to respond to Thomas Magg's Fifth Amendment challenge. So we'll touch on that briefly, but also in that conversation, we'll have to talk about, of course, some of the impetus behind banning weapons. People who want more gun control regularly point to mass casualty shooting events. And yesterday, the U.S. Department of Justice released a report, pretty damning report, about the Uvalde response. So we'll take a look at some of that as well. Also, we've got to discuss spending priorities. You've got the governor touting the Smart Start early childhood education program while expected to continue the program in the current fiscal year to next fiscal year. But what about all of the other spending for things like the ongoing migrant concerns? And how's that crowding out things that could possibly also benefit the families and school children? The Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Act. So we'll touch on some of that as well. Plus, if you guys are into sports, I don't really watch sports, but apparently the Rose Bowl is huge, and the Rose Parade, also pretty big. Well, your Illinois tax dollars is going to pay for a float, and I was able to get the receipts, so to speak. So stay tuned. We'll talk about that as well. It's right here with Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out. We've got plenty to get to, so stay tuned. The state of Illinois is supposed to respond to Attorney Thomas Magg's Fifth Amendment challenge to Illinois' gun and magazine ban today. That's according to Judge Stephen McGlynn, who denied the state's motion to delay a response on the Fifth Amendment challenge. This, as you've also got a court hearing set for early next month in that ongoing litigation. Welcome back, Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you support what I'm doing each and every morning from my home office. Please do check out some of the merchandise as well, or just simply, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with your friends. All right, let's get into it, because there's a lot of angles to the latest in, gun control and litigation against regulations, including this week's U.S. Supreme Court hearing in the Chevron case, which is kind of fascinating, especially in the conversation in the context of Illinois. While the Chevron thing's more of a federal rules issue, I think it's something that can provide more context and understanding to a state like Illinois that has administrative rules and agencies essentially interpreting the law through a rulemaking process, and how those rules really could be changed when the political sea changes or when the political headwinds change. So we'll touch on some of that as well, but also the Uvalde school shooting report from the U.S. Department of Justice, pretty damning in as far as the police response to that mass shooting. But let's get into the latest out of the Southern District of Illinois federal courts, where we've been tracking this, of course, all of these different cases. And listen, I understand it can get confusing because you had the Northern District have some consolidated cases, and the Southern District had some consolidated cases. Those were all put into the appellate courts in the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, and then you had preliminary requests to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, so it can get convoluted and a little confusing, no question about it. But all of that was on preliminary requests for temporary relief while the case is dealt with on the merits. And I had somebody on a comment on YouTube ask, well, what does that mean? What do the merits mean? Well, that means you're getting to the meat of the arguments instead of the preliminary stuff, which was this needs to be stopped now before we actually get to the meat because people are being harmed now. All right. So apparently courts, at least after the Southern District did grant a preliminary injunction against the state law, other courts said, no, there's no immediate danger to people. They're not being irreparably harmed. Their rights are not being destroyed at the moment, and the state has a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. That's what the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals essentially said. And again, those were on the preliminary requests to halt a law while the case is dealt with on the merits. So now we've got in the Southern District the case being dealt with on the merits, and Judge Stephen McGlynn denying a motion to stay proceedings, meaning denying a motion to hold off on getting to the merits because plaintiffs groups wanted to go back to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to have them intervene again. McGlynn said no, they're moving forward. The mandate has been issued, and even yesterday, you have the court in the Southern District, a docket entry saying costs taxed by clerk in the amount of $2,020 against plaintiffs Caleb Barnett, Dane Harrell, Jeremy Langley, federal firearms licensees of Illinois, in favor of defendant Brendan Kelly, Kwame Raoul, and Governor J.B. Pritzker. So that was entered yesterday in the Southern District. And I'm thinking, and again, I'm not an attorney, I'm just an observer, I'm a journalist looking at these things regularly, but I'm pretty sure that's because, they ultimately went to the appellate court, and the appellate court decided against the plaintiffs. So you got that decision, and there's court costs and such. So that was entered yesterday, but a few days before that, you had Judge McGlynn order a scheduling conference, and this is after you had the scheduling conference from last week, where the judge, again, denied holding off getting to the merits. So McGlynn ordering that there will be a scheduling conference on February 2nd at 1:30. All right, so February 2nd at 1:30. What is that, Groundhog Day? It says the parties should be prepared to discuss scheduling issues and the timeline for discovery. So we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the case in the Southern District of Illinois when it comes to the state's gun and magazine ban. And again, that's coming up February 2nd, but today, at some point, the state is expected to respond to MAG's Fifth Amendment challenge to the state's gun and magazine ban and registry. Now, that's not the only argument. You've got the Second Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment, but they're going to start tackling the issues on all grounds, from my understanding, in a trial that Judge McGlynn's going to hold after they get the list of witnesses they want, the list of experts they want, the depositions done, and then they may be calling people to testify in Congress or to testify in the court and move forward with the hearings and get to some kind of final judgment on that claim out of the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court. So that's where we're at there. But of course, you've got other court action at the U.S. Supreme Court this week. You had the Chevron case being relitigated, so to speak. And this dealt with administrative rules on a federal level. But keep in mind, you've got administrative rules even here on a state level. That was pretty dominant news this week when it comes to gun litigation. But the Chevron case, it's interesting. It really gets into the weeds and whatnot. But here's just a little sample that C-SPAN pulled together of some of the back and forth between the litigants and the justices, overviewing some of the major arguments.
Do judges really rely on Chevron? You want to speak to that?
No, I'd love to speak to that because I think that's an important consideration. I mean, one of the premises of one of Justice Kagan's questions in the first argument was that, you rarely get to Chevron step 2, but there are statistics on this. There is the most exhaustive survey of over 1,000 cases by Barnett and Walker. We cited on page 33 of the blue brief. It found that courts were reaching step 2 in 70% of the cases. 70% of the cases. The Cato Institute brief, you might think, well, things have gotten better because that was a longitudinal study over a number of years. You might think, well, things are getting a lot better because we've signaled that Chevron is on sort of life support. But the Cato ran the numbers for like 2020 and 2021, and it's down to 60%. But it's still well over half the time your average judge in the Court of Appeals is getting to step 2. And Judge Kethledge, he hasn't updated that speech, but as far as I know, Judge Kethledge still hasn't gotten to step 2 once. And that's an unsettlement in the law. That's a disconnect in the law that it's very hard to get your fingers around. Like, at least if one circuit says the statute means X and another circuit says Y, everybody can see that. Cert can be granted. This court can resolve the case. But if courts are deciding some cases step 1, some cases step 2 in ways that are radically different, I don't even know how you really unearth that. So I think that's another huge problem with this.
So again, this is about how courts interpret rules, really. The idea is that if the Chevron decision, which allowed for administrative rules, from my understanding, to essentially be the law of the land, you had those saying if that's overturned, then you could turn courts into super legislators, and this idea that courts could then step in and possibly, take away the idea of rules being, crafted by an executive agency to interpret the laws, and then you got a court coming in and reversing that. Then the courts essentially are acting as super legislators, the argument is. But obviously, we've got equal branches of government. The legislative branch crafts the laws, the executive branch executes the laws, and the judicial branch, they interpret the laws. But clearly this is something that I think is going to be decided sometime in June, and it'll be interesting to see how it impacts not just federal rulemaking, but also state rulemaking, for that matter. Here's a little bit more from the oral arguments heard in front of the U.S. Supreme Court as collected by C-SPAN earlier this week.
Were they wrong then? And if they weren't wrong, then what, if anything, has changed since then?
So, Justice Alito, I think they were partially right then. So let me say what's changed and what hasn't changed, i.e. what the court missed back in Chevron. What has changed is we've come a long way in statutory interpretation. And, if Chevron was a response to some of the excesses of the D.C. Circuit in the freewheeling days of the late 70s and the use of legislative history, and, oh, by the way, the text of this statute appears in the margin of my opinion, and I'm not going to talk about it again because I'm off to the races. We now, I think, are all textualists. The focus is much greater on the text of the statute. And once you recognize that, you recognize the problem with deferring at a certain point to the agencies. And let's look at the track record of the agencies before this court. If they are so expert, they should be able to persuade you in case after case that they're getting these statutes right. By my count, and by the Cato Institute in their amicus brief, since the court last cited Chevron, the administration is batting about 300 in these cases. So expertise is not all what it's cracked up to be. And that's true even in the most complicated cases. Look at the American Hospital Association's case. I don't think you're going to find a statute that's more complicated than that one. But yet this court had no trouble unanimously saying that you can't have hospital chain-specific pricing without first doing a survey.
Well, I don't know whether you can say we had no trouble.
I was going to say that, but yeah.
So clearly, a lot of legalese and a lot of reference to other cases, but the crux is really, can courts come in and interpret rules based off of laws, administrative rules based off of laws? And the reason I bring up the Chevron case, because again, that deals with federal stuff, it still kind of overlays onto what Illinois is dealing with when it comes to the state's gun and magazine ban. Yeah, the legislature passed the law, the governor executes it, the agency makes rules, those rules have a lot of questions, and then the courts are now being tasked with determining whether or not the law violates the Constitution. And the rules in Illinois, what's fascinating is the gun control rules allow for state police to modify the list of banned guns every October 1st. So later on this year, state police are going to be modifying the rules to update the list of banned firearms. Again, the question and the arguments about the Second Amendment and the clause of shall not be infringed. Well, if you've got an executive agency that could, shift hands at a future election, maybe it goes to a Republican and they just completely swipe out the rules. So the administrative rules and how they're implemented, a fascinating conversation. It really gets into the weeds of things and it's super wonky, but I think it's important that people who are tuned into this do kind of keep an open ear as to what's happening. But obviously, gun control and the rules that follow and how they're implemented and the lawsuits that happen, there's always a pretext to leading to gun control efforts. And we've seen mass shootings across the country, absolutely tragic events where a lunatic with a firearm goes and shoots and kills people and maims and injures others. Just horribly tragic. Nobody wants to hear these headlines and nobody wants to see that happen. But what you do have is people using those events as a pretext to bring about more gun control. But they don't necessarily do that after a thorough review of what may have happened at a shooting, a mass shooting. They don't necessarily look at the motive that somebody may have had when they go into conduct a mass shooting. They don't look at that person's mental health or the police response. The gun control advocates seem to go right to the firearm and want to ban the firearm. Well, after the Uvalde shooting that happened May 24th of 2022, here we are now, January 19th of 2024. You've got the Department of Justice releasing their report, and it's pretty damning. Devastating report for a devastating event. The USA Today network reports DOJ cops failed in Uvalde shooting. Put the blame on the school's police chief, put the blame on other officers, a 500-page report. Here is the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, giving just an overview of the report.
As I told families and survivors last night, the department's review concluded that a series of major failures in leadership, in tactics, in communications, in training, and in preparedness were made by law enforcement leaders and others responding to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary. As a result, 33 students and 3 of their teachers, many of whom have been shot, were trapped in a room with an active shooter for over an hour as law enforcement officials remained outside. I also told the families and survivors how deeply sorry I am for the losses they suffered that day and for the losses they have suffered every day since. I told them that the priority for the Justice Department in preparing this report has been to honor the memories of those who were taken from them. And I told the families gathered last night what I hope is clear among the hundreds of pages and thousands of details in this report. Their loved ones deserve better.
So obviously you can go read that report yourself, but there are a lot of things in there highlighting the failures of local law enforcement in that case. And we've seen this time and again as well, where even in Illinois, a couple of mass shootings of recent memory, the Highland Park shooting, the suspect in that case who still faces trial after saying that he's going to defend himself, and then now he's back to getting his own attorney. He allegedly got a FOID card despite having Illinois State Police in receipt of a clear and present danger report. We have this thing in Illinois called the Firearm Owner's Identification Card, and it's required for anybody who wants to purchase purchase or own firearms or ammunition to register with the Illinois State Police that they are a firearm owner, and they get an ID card. And then they have to present that ID card to state gun shops and so forth. Illinois is one of, I think, 4 states that have this thing. Obviously, it's being challenged in the federal courts with some movement that's expected to happen in May this year. Another case by Attorney Thomas Magg down in the Southern District, so we'll watch that. But regardless, the FOID card is there to prevent people from getting a firearm that aren't supposed to have one. Say they have a criminal history, a violent criminal history. Say they have a history of being in a mental health institution. Say they have other prohibiting factors, like having clear and present danger reports issued against them. And that's what exactly was the case with the Highland Park shooting suspect, with state police acknowledging they were in receipt of a Highland Park police clear and present danger report before that suspect filed to get a FOID card and was granted a FOID card. State police say that they've fixed that in the rules. But you also have, even before that, in 2019, the Aurora warehouse shooting that happened. That was an individual who had a FOID card despite having a criminal history in another state, but when he went to apply for a concealed carry permit, that's when Illinois State Police found the prohibiting factor and then canceled his FOID card, and they were supposed to go and revoke the FOID card from the individual, but they never did that. So after the FOID card revoked, a certain amount of time goes by, this individual takes a firearm to his employer and shoots and kills people. So clearly, these are other instances where law enforcement has dropped the ball, so to speak. And listen, it's not an easy job, law enforcement. There's no question. But you got to think about all of these different things that are put into place to prohibit or to help, and then things aren't completely followed through. And should there be some kind of, negligence leveled against people? And again, what this is it's just a conversation of, people's swift reaction, knee-jerk reaction, some may say, to ban guns after a mass shooting, instead of looking at the loopholes and the problems and the mental health and so on. So there's obviously a lot more to be said about all of this. So clearly, we'll be tracking this as we progress throughout, but it's a tough subject to handle, and I appreciate you guys being part of the conversation each and every morning, checking in live with Bishop on Air. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, notification bell, all that jazz. Be sure to also check out the merchandise shop if you want to support the program, and we'll be back with so much more each and every weekday morning. It is Bishop on Air. There are limited tax dollars in the state of Illinois and a lot of priorities, but when you've got things like the ongoing migrant crisis costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars and recently enacted programs to spend hundreds of millions more, plus all of the pension obligations the state has, how do you prioritize all of this? Welcome back, Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I cover the Illinois State House for the Center Square, and you can find all that work at thecentersquare.com. And Governor J.B. Pritzker, he's been making the rounds across the state, touting his Smart Start early childhood education program. And the conversation is also about priorities. So the governor was actually down in Belleville yesterday, and then rather earlier this week he was in Belleville. Yesterday he was in Rochester, just outside of Springfield, and then he traveled up to Peoria to promote his Smart Start early childhood education program. It's $250 million, part of the current state budget that ends at the end of June this year, and it's opening up childcare seats. It's opening up positions within daycares, for instance. In K through 12, obviously they get a lot of money, but there's not been enough focus, some say, on early childhood programs, and there are what they call child care deserts, where there's not enough choices for people to take their child to have daycare while they go off and make a living for their family. So the governor announced the Smart Starts program, where it's going to spend $250 million to, subsidize childcare pay in some areas, to help build out childcare centers. And he's touting that their goal of 5,000 new childcare seats across the state, they surpassed that goal. I want to say they got close to 6,000 extra seats. So he's advancing this, wanting to get this into the budget for next year as well. But clearly, $250 million, it's a $250 million. The state's budget was a little over $50 billion, I believe. We'll see what the numbers come in to be here soon. But, is that something that's going to be sustainable? Especially considering all of the other pressures that there are on state spending, on taxpayer resources. Pensions takes one out of every $5. So we spend about $10 billion on the state's pension system in Illinois. And we're still $140 billion unfunded liability. But every year we spend about $10 billion on pensions. K through 12 education. We spend about $10 billion on K through 12 education. So you've got all the other government services that need to be operated. So clearly, there's a lot of priorities when it comes to how your tax dollars are spent. Well, after the governor was talking about the Smart Start program in Rochester, I asked him about how do you continue this type of program moving forward with things like, for instance, the migrant crisis and the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent on that ongoing issue. Here's the governor.
Well, let me be clear. We've been balancing the budget every single year I've been in office. We're going to continue to balance the budget. This is a high priority. Every time anyone asks me about whether something should be funded and whether we should continue to fund something, it's all a question of priorities. I think the members of the General Assembly and I talk about this all the time across the aisle too, about what are our priorities, where are we going to put resources, and if we don't have enough resources for everything that everybody wants, what can we look to do in the future, or what should we stop doing in order to make sure we're balancing expenditures with revenues?
So yes. Again, the governor talking about balancing the budget and how he's done it the past 5 years. Of course, you had billions of dollars going to the state coffers during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the governor and Democrats say that's not what's helping them balance the budget. However, moving forward, they're looking at possible deficits now that those COVID dollars have dried up. But if we're looking at possible deficits, which could be, $600-700 million possibly? I'm not sure of the exact numbers. We'll get to all of the budget season stuff in the weeks ahead when the General Assembly comes back. But clearly, there's going to be a crunch. And new programs, when you might not have as much revenue coming in, are hard to sustain. So that's really, listen, the Smart Start program, a shared priority for Republicans and Democrats, I'm hearing at the State House, but about the priorities of spending, especially when you've got an unknown amount of money being spent on the migrant crisis. I talked with Republican State Representative Mike Coffey yesterday about the spending priorities, especially with those pressures of the migrant crisis in Illinois. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I'm very concerned because, like here today, we're here about Smart Start, and those are shared priorities by Republicans, Democrats. And what I'm concerned about as we go forward into the General Assembly and money becomes tighter and tighter and tighter after we've gone through COVID and all that, what are we going to do for these type of programs? And this migrant crisis, having gone down there, it's a national crisis that has to be addressed by the President of the United States. I mean, quite honestly, Joe Biden has done a horrific job. This is his responsibility. He has caused this, not the governor of Texas. The governor of Texas, I went down there. These are small counties, not a lot of population. I mean, you see on TV Eagle Pass where 50,000 people have come through there, and that's a town of 20,000 people. The people that live there can't go to the hospital. They can't, they can't go to the grocery store. I mean, it's really boggling down. They don't have the police force, the resources to handle that. And, in defense of the governor of Texas, he had to do it because only the Illinois governor, the governor of California, the governor of New York have the ability to get Joe Biden to do his job, which is to secure the border, and he has not done it. Joe Biden's the problem. The border has to be secured before we deal with anything else. And it's not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is not about not liking, people, from other countries. That's not. This is a national security issue. And when you go down there, they will tell you that it is about the fentanyl crisis. the number of drugs that are coming into this country now has doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And it's about fentanyl, and it's about the cartels moving that in. The migrants are pawns in this drug crisis, and it's a war that, quite honestly, we need to declare the cartels as terrorist organizations, which is what they will tell you in Texas when you go down to the border. And it's not a political thing about Republicans and Democrats. It's about our own national security. It's a national security problem that's got to be stopped.
So again, that's State Representative Mike Coffey, and talking about the priorities that they share with Democrats about the Smart Start program, but those can get crowded out with the ongoing issues, the southern border impacting the migrants coming to the state of Illinois, costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Somebody rightly points out this issue about, Tnieber says Smart Start good, Invest in Kids bad. We'll touch on Invest in Kids because there are a couple of schools that are closing because the Invest in Kids program has expired. And all of this talk about shared priorities. But Coffey goes on to talk about the need to find out how this money is being spent in Illinois and to get to the bottom of how they can possibly curb some of the spending on the migrant issue. And it really starts with federal policy to close the border, he said.
The big problem that we've got is the free health care. Before we had this, it was the free health care that had ballooned. How do you look at the citizens of Illinois, the single moms that go to work every single day and have to pay for their health insurance, and then you are told that people from other countries are just coming in and they're getting free health care? That's got to stop so that we can fund the priorities for the citizens of Illinois.
So again, Illinois does have a program that fully subsidizes the health insurance of migrants in the country, non-citizens who are over the age of 42 and also over the age of 65. They did have to curb new enrollees for the programs, especially as the cost continued to balloon. But all of that, it's essentially taking away resources from other areas. You can see, obviously, if it's going to impact, say, the Smart Start spending, but you do also have the end of the Invest in Kids program, which did not take tax dollars out of tax coffers for the state. It was merely a tax credit program. So it wasn't like, there was a line item in the budget that said we're going to give $100 million to private schools from the state budget. No, the program was a tax credit saying that if people donated to a fund to give to kids for school choice to go to private schools, they would get a 75% income tax credit for the state of Illinois. So it would just mean that there wouldn't be that amount of money going into the state budget. So what you had, of course, is all of the debate about that program that didn't happen. They did not even have committee hearings on possibly extending the program before the sunset on December 31st of last year. While that sunset came and went, the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program, Illinois' only school choice program, ended at the end of last year. And a headline here, we'll just share this with you. This is from St. Francis of Rome in Cicero and St. Odilo in Berwyn, both closing in June. The news release I've got here, it says that education leaders, parents, and students gathered at St. Francis of Rome in Cicero in response to the Archdiocese of Chicago announcing the closure of their schools, along with St. Odilo in Berwyn. The majority of the school's students are recipients of Illinois' tax credit scholarship program, and the schools are no longer financially viable since the Illinois General Assembly failed to renew the Invest in Kids tax credit program at the conclusion of 2023. Empower Illinois stands in solidarity with the parents, students, teachers, and communities of St. Francis of Rome and St. Odilo. Without this life-changing scholarship program, many of those families simply could not afford to attend the school, forcing its closure. And that was according to Bobby Sylvester, Executive Director of Empower Illinois. They say, sadly, we know that these are unlikely to be the last schools to close unless our legislators act this spring to renew the program. We call on all of the Illinois General Assembly to re-engage in the vital work of providing educational opportunities to low-income families and students through this program by passing an extension this spring. Will they do it? We shall see. But obviously, this is some troubling news for people who really benefited from the Invest in Kids School Choice Scholarship Program. But in the conversation about priorities, of course, you've got the ongoing questions about priorities of spending, and a lot of money's going to the migrant issue. And again, the migrant issue is costing hundreds of millions of dollars, but are we getting a good bang for our buck? to take care of the humanitarian needs of those migrants. Again, Mike Coffey with some questions about how that's playing out and how much needs to be known about all of this and how do we get to those answers. Should we see line by line spending on these contracts and who's getting these monies from Illinois tax dollars?
Yeah, we definitely, and I think that's something that the Republican caucus is working on going in there. We are going to have bills that we're going to propose here on what to do about the crisis, and that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks.
So something else, too, in the conversation about the ongoing migrant issue is what is exactly, an asylum seeker. You had some Republicans earlier this week say that they need to end the state's sanctuary policies through the Trust Act. The Trust Act being a measure that says you cannot have local or state law enforcement work with federal immigration officials in order to go after somebody with an immigration detainment order, if that's the only reason that they are the subject of a warrant. If they are, a violent felon and they're also an illegal immigrant, then, the local and state police can go do that. But if it's only that they're an illegal immigrant, they can't, according to the Trust Act. So what you have is, some people saying we need to end that policy because and also the policies of the free health care for certain migrants and so on, because it attracts people to the state of Illinois who have crossed the southern border in what some say is an illicit manner. Now, Governor J.B. Pritzker has said these aren't, illegal immigrants crossing the border recently. They're asylum seekers. And he says that there's a difference between asylum seekers and those who are illegal or undocumented. Here's the governor yesterday.
Well, I don't want to give a tutorial on the difference between undocumented immigrants and those who are asylum seekers. Asylum seekers are legally in this country. Undocumented immigrants, not. They're undocumented. Asylum seekers are documented. So we address them differently, people who are here legally than people who are not. The discussion about, being a welcoming state or a sanctuary state, all of that discussion has always been about what are we going to do about the undocumented people who've been here for decades. They've been holding down jobs. They have apartments or places to live. They are essentially acting as all of the other residents of Illinois are acting in full faith, following the law and so on. And the question about the challenges that are brought up in a press conference like that have zero to do with the current migration crisis that's occurring, which is being fueled by the governor of Texas. People are showing up in Texas. It is a challenge for Texas, there's no doubt about it, and for the nation. And it ought to be addressed on a national basis, not on a piecemeal basis. And the governor of Texas causing problems state by state to the states that he chooses to send people to and concentrate them. That ought not be the way that we address this as a country.
So again, Governor J.B. Pritzker doing some talking about the immigration issue and what constitutes an asylum seeker, how that differentiates them from those who are here undocumented or here illegally. But if you read the article at thecentersquare.com/Illinois, Pritzker responds to Republicans calling for end of migrant sanctuary status. You've got the Republicans, State Senator Andrew Chesney, saying that the Trust Act we talked about earlier needs to end. He said we need to anticipate that we're going to communicate with federal authorities when 80% of those asylum applications that are anticipated to be rejected. And you also had State Representative Dan Calkins also say, he said he thinks it's close to 90% of everyone that goes to court for asylum is sent back to their country of origin because they're not legitimate asylum seekers. Well, I wanted to do a little bit of fact checking, and I went and found the National Immigration Forum, and they compiled statistics that showed that the percentage of those who get their asylum granted, in some cases, it is very low. How many people are granted asylum? Nearly 20,500 individuals. This is just fiscal year 2016. 20,500 out of 73,081 were granted asylum. All right, so that is about 28% granted asylum. That's 2016. It went on to talk about how different approval rates vary by court, and they range from 10% to 80% approval rates. So clearly, you can even see a chart here of the denial rates and the number of people seeking the asylum over the span of several years. But I imagine this number, the latest number they have is 2017. I imagine it's going to spike considerably. And again, this is from the National Immigration Forum. So you can look up that fact sheet and see the data for yourself. So clearly, the question is, if we've got this flood of asylum seekers and how that exactly is going to translate to those who are legitimate asylum seekers, we may see a whole bunch of people that need to be deported. And will Illinois follow suit and have some policies in place to allow for that type of deportation? We shall see. I guess it's all about priorities, is how tax dollars are going to be spent. So a little bit of scattershot here, but hopefully you're understanding at least how the lines are being kind of connected and getting those dots all put in place. All right, appreciate you guys hanging out. It's Bishop on Air. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and follow along, would you? All right, stay tuned. Many more segments coming up. Of course, all throughout the week, we'll do the live show each and every weekday morning, but we segment out our clips as well, so you can see those in a quick digest. So like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Somebody asked about Spotify. Just search Bishop on Air on Spotify. You should be able to find it really anywhere you find your podcast. So check it out. All right. Stay tuned. We've got some more coming up here with Bishop on Air. Illinois spent around $560 million. Let me start that over. Gotta get it just right. Illinois taxpayers covering about $560,000 to take part in the Rose Parade, so they could have a float that featured the Blues Brothers. Welcome in, Bishop on Air. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out each and every weekday morning. This is what I do kind of just on my free time, I guess. But obviously I do report for thecentersquare.com, where you can see this story about how much Illinois paid for the float of the Rose Bowl. And this was earlier this year. And I don't watch sports, so I didn't even know that this was going on. But if you check out the thecentersquare.com/Illinois, you'll see Illinois pays hefty sum to participate in Rose Bowl parade. Beautiful parade, really is. And this is what it looked like when it was streamed on ABC for the parade just before, a whole bunch of tournament games or something. I'm not sure what the Rose Bowl is even, but hey, apparently the parade is widely watched to where a state like Illinois would spend $560,000 to take part in that parade. Here's some of what that looked like with your tax dollars.
All things Blues Brothers, synonymous with Chicago and the spirit of Illinois.
All right, some dancing, stage dancing. Enjoy Illinois, the Illinois Office of Tourism. Performance by Straight No Chaser. Good choreography. Oh, look, it's got the pink elephant there. A pink elephant's in Springfield. We got one of those giants, like the Lauterbach man in Springfield. Abraham Lincoln Hotel, a little sign of Chicago. A rainbow float with flowers. Blues Brothers impersonators dancing, getting some ABC live stream, about 2 minutes worth on national television. Interesting. Some good dancing. I can't dance like that. I'm more of a mosh pit guy. I like to throw some elbows and get in there and do some moshing, but so yeah, that's the float. You guys paid for it. How much? $560,000 you paid for it. So again, go check out thecentersquare.com, where you can see just how much this all cost. And if you look at the documents there, one in particular deals with kind of an overview, a sponsor agreement. And through the Freedom of Information Act, I got these documents, and I only got them like earlier this week, 2 weeks after I requested the documents. But, it goes through, some of the benefits and the various outlines of participating in this, and moving on with how you can terminate the contract and all of this stuff. But then you get into the costs, and what you're essentially seeing here is the breakdown. Float entry fee, $25,000. Special performance fee, $185,000. Then the performance budget to be determined, but the float build budget, $350,000. So that comes out to about $560,000 that the state of Illinois paid to get into the Rose Bowl parade. So fascinating stuff. Again, go check out thecentersquare.com, where you can read this for yourself. What's also interesting is that the 24-foot tall float took 3 months to build. 22,000 volunteer hours. But interestingly enough, it also did not grab any of the 24 float trophies awarded this year. It's the second year that Enjoy Illinois' tourism campaign has been in the Rose Parade. But according to the tourism numbers, $44.3 billion in economic activities spurred on by Illinois tourism. That was just in 2022. So, hey, did we get a good bang for our buck there? $560,000 to be in the Rose Bowl for what, like 2 minutes worth or so of, Rose Bowl parade coverage earlier this year. Kind of fascinating to see some of that stuff. And hopefully you're getting a better idea of, some of the, again, spending priorities. All right, Bishop on Air, thank you so much for hanging out with me on this Friday. I'm going to get out of here and have myself a good weekend. Hopefully you do as well. Peace out. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and more. All right. Appreciate you guys hanging out. X, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere, just search Bishop on Air. All right. All right, guys, seriously, thank you so much for being live with us. The chat's just off the hook. I wish I could spend more focus on the chat, but gosh, you guys are chatting amongst yourselves, which is good. I'm down. Happy to facilitate that. Still got to figure out how I can take some calls live, because I'd love to be able to work you guys in and hear some of your thoughts and do some caller segments. I just got to find that time on my free time to be able to do that. So it's just some technical stuff. We'll see. Tenebra says, Greg got stickers and t-shirts. Need a morale patch. I do have some patches. You can see them right here next to the drone. I got some more patches. Might do some other giveaways. Illinois Radio Network mug. Gosh, this thing's what now? 12 years old, a Silver Dome Award. You can get yourself a Bishop on Air bumper sticker at the store. There's my ham transceiver. Gotta get that thing back working. Just gotta get the antenna up. My little Baofeng, some walkie-talkies. Got this at an antique store. This is really cool. This is an impromptu showing of what's behind me here. This right here is an antique Morse code device and antique headphones, which I think was like from World War II, maybe? I don't know, you can see a close-up here with that picture that just flashed, but yeah, a little bit of a show of some of the things I've got. My Epiphone Les Paul. It's not a Gibson. I've had this thing since I was probably 16 or 17. It's got a chip in it from a skateboard. I'll have to show you that skateboard I recently just bought. I might switch some stuff up around here. Who knows? Either way, just having some fun. Appreciate you guys being here. I got to get out. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend. Stay warm. Stay safe. Hug the ones you love. And we'll see you guys here on Monday, where we will review the filing from the state of Illinois against Thomas Magg's Fifth Amendment challenge of the state's gun and magazine ban. All right, guys, have yourselves a wonderful weekend. We'll see you back here next week.
Red.